pro-life message. Vice President Mike Pence is on the campaign trail and makes remarks in defense of the unborn. Letter from lawmakers. Senator Ted Cruz is among the members of Congress asking the Food and Drug Administration to make a change to the abortion pill. Coronavirus crisis. New developments in the search for a vaccine. And eye on China. A lawyer wants to investigate whether Beijing is guilty of genocide against a religious minority. On EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, September 3rd, 2020. Good evening and thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. Life is winning in America. That's what Vice President Mike Pence said today as he brought the Trump administration's pro-life message to North Carolina. On one stop, he visited Gateway Women's Care, which educates, cares for, and counsels pregnant women in crisis situations. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, good evening. In Raleigh, North Carolina today, Vice President Mike Pence said more young people are embracing a culture of life. And he also spoke at the Susan B. Anthony List event and had these encouraging words.
I have faith in the American people that when with compassion and with principle, we continue to bring the cause of life before the American people, you're going to see what this rising generation is demonstrating every day. You're going to see more and more people stand by the right to life.
Meanwhile, Election Day just 2 months away now in North Carolina. Absentee ballots go out tomorrow, Friday. And President Donald Trump says he wants to make sure your vote counts. In fact, he tweeted about it today. The big day is November 3rd, 2 months from now. The White House press secretary, Kayleigh McEnany, addressed voting this afternoon.
So what Democrats want you to do is say, trust us, but don't verify. Don't verify that your vote's been counted. This president's trying to enfranchise Americans, which is exactly what he's been saying. He wants every American to have a vote.
Now, regarding the pandemic, McEnany said the president wants a vaccine as quickly as possible, but not to jeopardize public safety. You can't sacrifice safety. It has to be 100% airtight. And back to North Carolina, there are 15 electoral votes up for grabs. President Trump was there himself last night, and tonight he's in Pennsylvania, another key battleground state. He's there tonight for a campaign event. Tracy?
White House correspondent Owen Jensen reporting for us tonight. Thank you so much, Owen. Democratic presidential nominee Joe Biden is on the road today, too, making a visit to the city of Kenosha in the battleground state of Wisconsin, just days after President Trump's visit. On Biden's schedule, a private meeting with the family of Jacob Blake, the black man whose shooting by a white police officer sparked days of destructive protests. The former vice president also plans to speak with business and civic leaders, as well as law enforcement officials. Philip Crowther, international affiliate reporter for the Associated Press, is in Kenosha, outside of Grace Lutheran Church, the site of one of today's events, and he joins us now. Philip, welcome back. Good to see you. So, do we have any details yet of the meeting between former Vice President Joe Biden and Jacob Blake's family?
Yeah, they were just revealed, actually, by Joe Biden inside of Grace Lutheran Church. They can see behind me now. He said that he actually had a phone conversation with the man who is still in hospital. He's out of the ICU, says the former vice president. He also spoke to Jacob Blake's mother. All of this during an in-person meeting that he held at Milwaukee Airport with some family members of Jacob Blake right after landing here on what is essentially his very first campaign trip outside of his home area. Of course, meeting the Jacob Blake family and having a phone call with him is precisely what the president did not do 2 days ago. Most notably, the president didn't even mention Jacob Blake's name during his visit on Tuesday. And of course, remember, it was the fact that Jacob Blake was shot in the back 7 times by a police officer that led to the protests and riots here in Kenosha in the first place.
Well, Philip, ahead of today's visit, Biden said the trip was about, quote, making sure that we move forward. How is this trip being received, and what are some of the public events while he's there?
Well, I'd say, first of all, that there is a little bit of enthusiasm, as you can maybe see here outside of the church, for Joe Biden. His trip has been very much a behind closed doors one. Very few opportunities for his supporters to actually see him. What he did here at the church was actually a listening session inside of the sanctuary. There were around 20 members of the community, some community leaders, some members of law enforcement. One police officer was in attendance. There was a protester also who spoke, and essentially the vice president listened to them and then did take the microphone and spoke about what he thinks a Biden administration can do about racial injustice in the United States. He, of course, sees himself as the man who can unite this country during his administration, a very tall order for him, and, of course, bringing reform to police departments across the United States. That is another very, very optimistic ask on behalf of the former vice president, but he believes he can be the one who can get those things done.
Now, Philip, you covered the president's trip to Kenosha earlier this week. Can you compare and contrast these two visits, and what stands out the most?
Well, look, the main thing is that this one was simply less public. We didn't see the president meet the family of Jacob Blake. There might be a photo at some point. It doesn't exist at this point. Then there was a motorcade ride from the former vice president to this church. We didn't see him enter it, and the people who you can see behind me waiting for him are probably not going to get a glimpse of him either. This is probably how the vice president wanted this. He wants to be seen as somebody who came here to listen, to have conversations, and not be photographed or filmed too much. And of course, that is the contrast to what we saw from the president on Tuesday. He was seen in front of ruins of one of the shops that were destroyed during the riots here. 30 buildings altogether had burned to the ground. And then the president had also a very public meeting with law enforcement and the National Guard included, for example. The message is a very, very different one. The president's message was about law and order. The former vice president's message here was essentially that he is here to listen and can maybe take some of those messages back home with him and propose them for some notable changes within a potential Biden administration.
Philip Crowther, international affiliate reporter for the Associated Press. Thank you so much for your insights. GOP lawmakers want the FDA to classify the abortion pill as a hazard to public health. 20 Republican senators and 72 Republican congressmen and women signed joint letters to FDA Commissioner Stephen Hahn this week. They cite reasons the abortion pill should have never been approved in the U.S. and call on the FDA to remove the abortion pill from the market. A rescue operation is underway off of Japan after a ship with 42 crew members and nearly 6,000 cows went down in rough seas. Japan's Coast Guard rescued at least one crew member this morning. The cargo ship had sent out a distress signal. A powerful typhoon hit southern Japan yesterday and has left widespread flooding in North Korea. China commemorates the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II in the Pacific. President Xi Jinping led a moment of silence. And at the Kremlin in Moscow, some members of the Russian Communist Party led a procession to the grave of Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. A prominent human rights lawyer in Britain is putting together a tribunal in London to investigate claims of genocide in China. He says no court would probe China's alleged violation of human rights.
Allegations against China about potential genocide and other crimes certainly falls into the category of questions that should be asked and answered, but probably won't be by any other body.
And he'll be looking into abuses against Uyghur Muslims in China's far western region of Xinjiang. His team will gather evidence, including possible testimony from former security guards who work at the concentration camps. A group of Benedictine English monks are saying goodbye to their 2-century-old monastery. The Downside Abbey is one of only 4 minor basilicas in England. In fact, it is the senior Benedictine monastery of the English Benedictine congregation. It was originally founded in the early 17th century at Douai in the Spanish Netherlands. Joining us now with the story is Luke Copen, Europe editor for Catholic News Agency. Luke, welcome back. Good to see you. So why did these monks decide to leave their historic monastery?
Well, their numbers have dropped significantly in recent years. Now there are only 8 resident monks in the community, and they're living in accommodation that was originally built for more than 50 of them. Also, and this is crucial, they've been forced to sever their ties with Downside School, with which they've enjoyed a very long association. And they were forced to do this after a damning report into child protection at the school, which concluded that monks simply hadn't done enough to ensure the protection of the children in their care.
How have Catholics in England responded to the decision?
There's been widespread dismay at the news that the monks are going to be leaving the community. And that's because Downside Abbey is a very respected place for English Catholics. It's associated with the revival of English Catholicism, and it's produced many great figures who are very much universally respected among Catholics here.
Luke, can you talk a little bit about the history of this abbey and its legacy in England?
Absolutely. It's produced some really great people over the years. They include people like Bishop Christopher Butler, who was a major figure at the Second Vatican Council, and it's also produced great scholars as well in its time. They boast a really beautiful church. The Abbey Church at Downside is a real gem. It's one of only 4 minor basilicas in England, and it's a very precious building that they're now going to have to be leaving behind. The monks also have a huge library of more than 450,000 books, and they take care of the archive of the English Benedictine congregation as well. So they're going to have to decide what to do with this great patrimony that's been in their care for so long.
Luke, I guess the big question right now is, where are the monks going to live?
They themselves don't know where they're going next. Everything's on the table, and one option is for them to move in with another English Benedictine community. That's a real possibility. I spoke to the abbot, the newly elected abbot, and he said that he hoped that the move would be an opportunity for the now very small community to focus once again on core monastic principles. He felt that they hadn't been able to do this in recent years because they're just such a small group of people managing such a huge site.
Luke, any idea what will happen to the property?
No, although the abbot did insist that the community would take very good care of all its responsibilities towards the Abbey Church and towards the library and towards the archives of the English Benedictine congregation. He said that in no way would they just be walking away from that and leaving it for other people to decide what to do with it.
Well, Luke, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it. Luke Copen, Europe editor for Catholic News Agency. Thanks again, Luke.
Thank you.
Coming up, we'll speak to a pro-life Tennessee state representative who says he was ousted from the Democratic Party for his views on life and marriage. And an update on the search for a COVID-19 vaccine. A pro-life Tennessee state representative is running as an independent after he was ousted from the Democratic Party for his views on life and marriage. The Catholic News Agency is reporting Representative John DeBerry, who has held his seat for 26 years, was removed from the Democratic ballot for the 2020 election by the state party's executive committee. The vote to remove him from that ballot came after the filing deadline had passed, preventing DeBerry from filing under another party. Tennessee State Representative John DeBerry joins me now by Skype. Welcome to the show, Mr. DeBerry. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, and hello to all of your viewers and listeners.
Well, I know that you've been in office now for more than 2 decades, and no doubt voters by now are familiar with your positions on life and marriage as well as school choice. So why do you think the Democratic Party had you removed from the ballot?
I think that it was a tactic that they decided to use, since they were pretty aware of the fact that the voters of District 90 have elected me consecutively 13 terms, and each time by a healthy percentage, either of more than 60 or even 70% on every election. So in order to elect the person that they have deemed is more of a Democrat than I am, that's going to carry the party ideology as it has evolved and stand and for those virtues that they consider important, then the only way in order for them to win and accomplish this was to find a way to remove me from the ballot so that the voters don't get a chance to vote. And this is exactly what they did and they accomplished by this coup they pulled back in April.
What type of message do you think this sends to your constituents?
It sends a message to the constituents, as the people, even if they agree with me or don't agree with me. It says that their vote is not important, that a tribunal of elitists, that they have more of a say about who represents them than they do. Basically, they said that the people of District 90 don't have enough information to elect their representative, that they would have to do it for them.
I know that you were one of more than 100 Democrats who signed a letter asking the platform committee of the Democratic National Convention to make abortion language in the party's platform more moderate, but we know that didn't happen. As an elected official and a minister, how do you feel about the direction that the party is headed?
Well, the Democratic Party has more or less made a decision that these issues are not important to them, for them to stand for what a large portion of people in that district stand for and believe. Both black and white and other cultures and ethnicities have loudly and clearly said 3 elections in a row, they have run against me and they have used my anti-abortion, my pro-marriage stance, my stance for parental responsibility and parental choice. They have plastered these positions all over my district. And so, therefore, you can't say that the people didn't know why they were voting for me. And what this does is it shrinks the tent of the so-called inclusive party to the extent that they say, if you don't believe what we believe, say what we say, vote like we tell you to vote, you're not welcome in this party. And I think folks should open their eyes and realize when they're being taken for granted, when they are not being respected, and most certainly when their views, their values, and their morals are being disdained as old-fashioned, passé, and on the wrong side of history.
On a different note, we only have less than a minute left, but I know you've also been receiving a lot of attention for denouncing the riots that we've seen across the country. As a longtime civil rights activist yourself, what's your message to those people that are resorting to violence?
Well, those who are resorting to violence right now, this was never the way of the civil rights movement. And what I repudiate is them in some way putting a mark on the legacy of my father and mother and many other fathers and mothers and grandmothers and great-grandmothers and fathers who stood with character, with courage, and with class and changed the world at that particular time. And Dr. Martin Luther King's entire movement was a peaceful protest. They put on their suits. In other words, they stood to dispel the stereotypes. I'm one of those people, and I said this in that speech, who went in the back doors, who rode on the back of the bus, who drank the colored water, who went to the colored school, who went to the zoo on Tuesday, who sat in the balcony where the coloreds were supposed to stand. These are things that I lived, and therefore we were marching for the basic rights, the basic constitutional and civil rights of being an American. Right now, these riots, this violence, this destruction, this dangerous behavior has nothing to do with civil rights and has everything to do with anarchy.
Well, sir, thank you so much for your time and for your insight and what you do. Tennessee State Representative John DeBerry, thank you again, sir.
Thank you for having me.
The pro-life movement and future battles in the Supreme Court are front and center this presidential election. Tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, host Catherine Hadro talks to a leading Catholic mind and scholar from Princeton University.
Is it a successful strategy to try to advance the pro-life cause through the courts? What are the strengths and weaknesses of that?
Well, you have to work in the courts. There's no question about it. You need to protect unborn babies to the extent that you can, and you need to protect women from dangerous procedures. All of that is
And Dr. Robert George's reaction to this week's petition from the Trump administration asking the Supreme Court to reinstate abortion pill restrictions. Tonight on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly at 10 p.m. Eastern. A potential coronavirus vaccine could be ready for Americans as soon as next month. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is asking states to begin preparations for distribution. However, that does not mean a vaccine will be approved. Correspondent Mark Irons reports. Mark?
Tracy, the CDC wants the country to be ready for vaccine distribution as soon as late October. Now, vaccines are still in trial phases. They may not be ready to go by then, but the federal government is hoping to remove any roadblocks in a potential rollout. Here's Dr. Anthony Fauci on possible vaccine timelines.
If someone comes out and says, I'm going to shoot for the possibility that I'll get it by October, you can't argue strongly against that. That's unlikely, not impossible. I think most of the people feel it's going to be November, December.
Dr. Fauci says a vaccine would not be approved for the American public unless it was both safe and effective. He emphasized that and said if it was approved, he'd even take it himself and recommend it to his family. Meanwhile, the death toll is peaking in Arkansas. The state reported 27 deaths from the coronavirus on Wednesday, its largest single-day increase. And if you're making plans for the Labor Day weekend, Dr. Fauci is urging caution. Try to keep activity outside, avoid crowds, and of course, social distance. He says in previous holiday weekends, we did see an increase in cases following the holiday, and he would hope moving from the summer into the fall, we don't have another surge to try and overcome. Tracy.
Correspondent Mark Irons reporting for us tonight. Thank you so much, Mark. Up next, a pro-life pastor tells us about his message to Planned Parenthood. A coalition of black leaders is calling out Planned Parenthood for, quote, targeting black communities for abortions. At the same time, the nation's largest abortion provider openly voices its support for the Black Lives Matter movement. In a letter to Planned Parenthood President Alexis McGill Johnson, they write in part, quote, can Planned Parenthood really claim to care for black lives while remaining complicit in the targeting of black pregnant women? This massive inequity and the disproportionate harm it does to black Americans is fully in keeping with the racist eugenicist vision of your organization's founder. Joining me now on Skype is Reverend Dean Nelson, Executive Director of the Pro-Life Human Coalition Action and one of the signatories of that letter. Reverend, welcome back to the show. Always good to see you.
It's a pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
You say the impact of abortion on the black community is disproportionate. Let's talk more about that and the lives lost.
Yeah, when you think about the roughly 1 million abortions that take place every year, roughly 36% of those are on black women. In cities like New York, there are more black children that are aborted than born alive. So it is huge in terms of the impact that abortion has had on the African American community. And we are charging and calling Planned Parenthood out because for over 100 years, through their vision of their founder, Margaret Sanger, they have systematically targeted black and minority communities specifically for their population control. And more recently, of course, since Roe v. Wade, for abortion.
Yeah, in your letter, you say 79% of Planned Parenthood surgical abortion facilities are located in or near communities of color. Why do you think that is, and in what ways does that support the legacy of Planned Parenthood's founder?
I think that it should be noted that Planned Parenthood's affiliate in New York charged the same thing, saying that Margaret Sanger was a racist, and even said that their organization has participated in reproductive harm. We know through many research pieces that have been done that Planned Parenthood puts their abortion facilities in walking distance of black and Latino neighborhoods. And so this letter, with over 100 African-American signers, some doctors, some lawyers, elected officials, both Catholic, Protestant, Democrat, and Republican, are really calling out the racist history of this organization.
Yeah, and you and I spoke back in June after the killing of George Floyd. We discussed the calls for racial equality across the country and what this moment means for the nation. In your opinion, what type of actions do you think the Planned Parenthood should take?
You know, what they should do is to live up to the lies that they've told in the past, saying that they provide health for women. Abortion is not health care. And at Human Coalition, that's what we've been doing for the last decade, is providing free health care for women who find themselves in unplanned pregnancies through our telehealth as well as our brick and mortar clinics. We will this year see some 100,000 women, mostly women of color, providing real answers for them who find themselves in these unplanned pregnancies. That's what Planned Parenthood should be doing. I don't expect that they'll change their business model after 100 years, and that's why we at Human Coalition offer that type of alternative.
Reverend, thank you so much for coming on the show. Always appreciate your insights. Reverend Dean Nelson, Executive Director of the Pro-Life Human Coalition Action. Thank you again.
God bless you. Thank you so very much.
And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.